Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be doing things a little differently. We're going to be writing a motivational book, but not just any book.
Oh,
This one's specifically for artists, for anyone out there on a creative journey. We're talking overcoming those blocks, you know the ones, silencing that inner critic we all have, and finding those sparks of inspiration even when things get tough.
sounds ambitious. I'm in. Where do we start?
Well, luckily we've got a fantastic guide to help us write this masterpiece.
Always happy to help unlock some creative potential. This should be fun.
So for this deep dive, our main inspiration is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Have you read it?
Oh, absolutely, a classic.
Yeah, it's a really powerful look at what holds us back creatively. Pressfield calls this force resistance,
Mm-hmm.
and man, is it relatable.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's that voice saying, you're not good enough, not ready, not talented enough. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, way too familiar. And Pressfield's so brilliant at showing how sneaky resistance can be. It's not always obvious, right? It might be procrastination, sure, but it can also be self-doubt or even getting caught up in distractions, those things that seem good on the surface.
So it's like resistance is a master of disguise, always finding new ways to sabotage us.
Exactly. And Pressfield also points out that it's a master of rationalization, too. It'll tell you, oh, you're too busy, or you don't have the right resources, or you need to be in the right mood to create.
And those excuses can be so convincing sometimes because there's often a little truth to them.
Right. Which makes them even harder to fight.
So how do we see through those disguises? How do we expose resistance for what it really is?
Well, Pressfield has this great antidote, turn pro.
Turn pro. What does that even mean? Does everyone need to quit their day job and become a starving artist?
No, not at all. It's more about a mindset shift. Approaching your art with the discipline and dedication of a professional, showing up consistently no matter what your mood is or what's happening around you.
So less weekend warrior
Hmm.
and more like making art a regular part of your life, like a habit.
Precisely. Think of it like an athlete training for the Olympics. They don't just practice when they feel like it, right? It's day after day, no matter what. That's the kind of commitment Pressfield's talking about. And his book actually lays out what this professional approach looks like.
One of the things that really struck me about this pro mindset was the idea of detaching from outcomes, not getting too caught up in needing external validation.
Oh, that's such a crucial point.
Yeah,
Pressfield reminds us that true success is about doing the work itself, pouring your heart into it, regardless of whether it wins awards or gets rave reviews.
it's about staying true to your own creative vision, not letting the need for outside approval dictate your worth.
Absolutely. And that actually ties into another concept he explores, viewing the artistic process as territorial.
Territorial. Okay, now I'm really curious.
Instead of getting trapped in comparing ourselves to others, we should be focusing on cultivating our own creative space, our own artistic domain.
So like creating our own little artistic universe where we're free to explore and experiment without worrying about fitting into some hierarchy.
Exactly. And claiming that territory, it takes courage, you know? Trusting your intuition, embracing your unique voice, being willing to stand out.
It sounds like claiming our creative territory is a crucial step in overcoming that resistance and really unlocking our potential. But how do we actually go about doing that? Does Pressfield offer any practical advice?
He does. He suggests connecting with our muse, that source of inspiration and guidance that's within each of us.
Oh, like calling upon a higher power, a wellspring of creative energy.
Exactly. And you don't have to be some epic poet to tap into this. It's there for anyone who's willing to open themselves up to it. And the amazing thing is, the more we create, the more we invite that muse into our lives. It's like building a stronger connection with our creative source.
It sounds like tapping into our muse is essential for fueling that artistic fire.
Hmm.
But how do we even know when we've made contact? How do we recognize its presence?
Well, it's different for everyone. Some people experience a burst of energy, tons of ideas, or just this feeling of clarity. Others feel a deep sense of joy or like they're in the flow, completely absorbed in their work.
Like those moments when time just seems to disappear and you're completely lost in what you're creating.
Exactly. Those are the moments when the magic happens. And Pressfield reminds us that those moments are available to all of us if we're willing to put in the work, show up consistently, and embrace those challenges that are just part of the journey.
Because let's face it, the creative path is rarely smooth sailing. There are always going to be bumps along the way, moments of self-doubt, times when you just feel like giving up.
Oh, absolutely. But it's important to remember that those challenges are all part of the process. They're the fire that tempers our creative spirit and helps us grow as artists. And, Pressfield actually offers a really interesting analogy for how to navigate those challenges. He compares the creative journey to the Iditarod.
The Iditarod. You mean that crazy dog sled race across Alaska?
The very
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. What do dog sledding and artistic inspiration have in common?
It's all about pacing. Think about it. Those mushers, they have to carefully manage their energy and their resources if they want to make it to the finish line.
Right.
Artists, we're kind of the same way. We need to find that sustainable rhythm for artwork.
So it's not about sprinting to the finish line. It's more about finding a steady pace that we can keep up over time.
You got it. Creativity, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And that ties back into Pressfield's whole idea of turning pro.
Right, right.
A professional artist gets that consistency is key. Showing up day after day, even when inspiration isn't exactly striking.
Like making creativity a habit, a regular part of your routine.
Exactly. And that kind of consistent effort, that dedication, it's what allows us to tap into that deeper well of creativity. That's how we invite the muse in more regularly, I think.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And Pressfield also reminds us that it's not just about avoiding resistance or even finding our muse. We also have to learn how to deal with failure. Because honestly, every artist faces setbacks, rejections, makes mistakes along the way.
Oh, for sure. Failure, it's just part of the process.
Yeah.
But Pressfield, he encourages us to see it not as some kind of defeat, but as a chance to learn.
So instead of getting totally discouraged by setbacks, we should see them as like stepping stones,
Yeah.
part of the path.
Exactly. The War of Art, it encourages this whole mindset of detaching from outcomes, focusing on the process itself rather than getting too hung up on the results.
It reminds me of that saying from the Bhagavad Gita, about how we have a right to our labor, but not to the fruits of our labor.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about surrendering to the process, trusting that it'll unfold in its own way and time. And that detachment, it can be incredibly freeing.
Yeah, because when you're not so worried about the results, you're more free to experiment, to play, to take risks. And that's often where the real breakthroughs happen.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another really important point Pressfield makes, which is the distinction between territory and hierarchy.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that earlier. Can you remind me what he means by those terms?
Sure. So he talks about how in the animal kingdom, individuals define themselves in one of two ways.
Yeah.
They either find their place within a hierarchy, like wolves in a pack, or they stake out a territory, like a bird with its nest.
So it's about where we find that sense of belonging, of
Oh,
security.
right. And for artists, Pressfield argues that focusing on territory is crucial.
Why is that? What makes territory so special for artists?
Well, think about it. When we're caught up in the hierarchy, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, competing for status and recognition. It's exhausting, really.
It's like we're so busy trying to climb that ladder of success that we forget to enjoy the actual act of creating.
Exactly. But when we focus on our territory, we're claiming that unique space for ourselves in the creative world, not trying to fit in with everyone else.
So it's about defining our own creative domain, following our own path, regardless of what others are doing.
You got it. It's about creating our own artistic universe, guided by our own internal compass.
So it's about finding that inner sanctuary where we can create freely without needing external validation.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's in that sanctuary that our most authentic work is born.
Okay, I love this whole idea of claiming our creative territory, but how do we actually go about doing that? Any practical tips from Pressfield?
He suggests asking yourself a few key questions. Where do you feel most at home creatively? What are you truly passionate about? What work would you keep doing even if no one else ever saw it?
So it's about identifying those things that truly inspire us, that light us up.
Exactly. Those are the things that will lead you to your creative territory. And once you find it, you need to protect it fiercely.
Protect it. What do you mean by that?
It means creating boundaries, setting aside dedicated time and space for your creative work, and guarding that space. No distractions allowed.
So it's about creating that safe, nurturing environment where our creative spirit can thrive.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. And it's in that protected space that you can really tap into your full potential.
So to recap, we've got overcoming resistance, finding our muse, embracing failure, and claiming our territory. These are some powerful concepts. Is there a common thread running through all of them?
There is. It's about connecting with our authentic selves.
Ah, that makes sense. When we're aligned with our true selves, we're more likely to resist those external pressures and tap into our own creativity.
Right, exactly. And Pressfield emphasizes that this takes courage. Facing our fears, embracing our imperfections, being willing to stand out.
It's like a journey of self-discovery, peeling back those layers of conditioning and expectations to reveal the true artist within.
I love that. And it's a journey worth taking because when we embrace our authentic selves, we unlock a level of creativity and fulfillment that we never knew was possible.
Now, you've mentioned turning pro several times. Can you unpack that a bit more? Is it just about discipline and consistency, or is there something deeper?
It's definitely about those things, but it's also about this deeper shift in mindset. It's a way of being in the world that puts creativity front and center, a commitment to excellence and integrity.
So it's about approaching our art with the same dedication and professionalism that we bring to other important parts of our lives.
Exactly, recognizing that it's not just a hobby, it's a calling, something that deserves our full attention and respect.
And Pressfield argues that this pro mindset is key to overcoming resistance and achieving lasting creative success.
Absolutely. Because when we approach our art like professionals, we're less likely to get derailed by distractions, setbacks, or those negative voices. We build up this resilience that allows us to keep creating even when things get tough.
So it's like that pro mindset gives us that inner strength to stay the course, even when we hit those inevitable challenges.
Exactly. It's about developing that unshakable belief in ourselves and our vision that keeps us moving forward no matter what.
So it's not just about mastering those technical skills, but also cultivating that inner strength and resilience that helps us weather the storms.
Precisely. And the War of Art gives us a roadmap for doing that. It's got practical strategies for managing time, overcoming procrastination, and silencing those negative voices that try to hold us back.
So it's like a blend of practical tips and those mindset shifts, all aimed at helping us become the best artists we can be.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that we have the power to create our own reality, to shape our creative journey in a way that feels true to us.
And that's an incredibly empowering message. But Pressfield focuses a lot on the internal struggles, that battle with resistance.
Huh.
What about those external challenges? Things like societal expectations, the pressure to make money, just the chaos of everyday life. Those can be pretty draining too.
Oh, absolutely. And while the War of Art is mostly about the internal battle, it's important to acknowledge that those outside forces have an impact. One strategy he suggests is creating boundaries.
Boundaries. You mean like setting aside time for creative work?
Yes, but also boundaries against those external pressures and expectations. Finding that balance between engaging with the world and protecting your creative space.
So like building a creative oasis, a place to retreat and recharge away from all the noise.
That's a great way to picture it. It's in those oases that we can really reconnect with our creative spirit.
And that reminds me of something else Pressfield mentions about detaching from our instruments. What did he mean by that exactly?
He's not saying we should abandon our tools completely. It's more about seeing them as what they are, instruments, extensions of our creative will. By detaching from them, we can get a clearer perspective on our work.
So not getting so caught up in the technical aspects, the need for perfection.
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture, the essence of your expression, rather than getting bogged down in the details, becoming the observer of your own process.
And how does this help us with that resistance we talked about?
Well, resistance often tries to attack our sense of self-worth, right? Tells us we're not good enough.
Ugh, that inner critic. It's always waiting to pounce.
But when we detach from our instruments, those attacks become less personal. We're not so easily shaken.
Like we're creating a buffer zone between our creative selves and those negative voices.
Precisely. And that buffer allows us to keep creating, even when those voices are shouting doubts. It's about protecting that core creative spark that drives our art.
This has been so inspiring. We've got a lot of great material for our motivational book, Overcoming Resistance, Finding Your Muse, Claiming Your Territory, Detaching from Outcomes.
It's a lot, but it's all about empowering artists.
Right. And, it's not about reaching some perfect state of creativity. It's about embracing the journey itself.
With all its ups and downs.
Exactly. Because those bumps along the way, those are what make it all worthwhile. They make us stronger and lead to those amazing breakthroughs.
Absolutely. So to anyone listening who feels that creative spark, remember, the power to create is within you. Embrace those challenges, find your creative oasis, and don't give up on your dreams.
The world's waiting to see what you create.
And until next time, keep diving deep.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the war of art and all this talk about fueling that creative fire, there's one thing that keeps coming to mind.
What's that?
We've covered a lot of ground on overcoming those inner obstacles, the resistance, the inner critic, all that.
Mhm.
But what about the pressures that come from the outside world? It feels like it's getting harder and harder to focus with all the distractions these days.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. Pressfield focuses mainly on that inner battle, but we can't just ignore the impact of everything going on around us.
Right.
And I think one of the most helpful strategies he offers, going back to what we talked about earlier, is creating boundaries.
Boundaries. You mean like setting aside dedicated time for our art?
Yes, but also boundaries against the world's expectations. All the noise and demands that can pull us away from our creative work.
So finding that balance, engaging with the world, but also fiercely protecting our creative space.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can be inspired by the world without letting it overwhelm you.
Like building a creative oasis,
Yeah.
a place where you can retreat and recharge away from all the distractions.
That's such a great way to put it. It's in those quiet spaces that you can really tap into that wellspring of inspiration, that creative energy that's always there waiting to be unleashed.
And this reminds me of something else Pressfield talks about, detaching from our instruments.
Yeah.
What did he mean by that? It sounds a little extreme. Like, are we supposed to abandon our tools?
No, no, not at all. He's not suggesting we give up our paintbrushes or our guitars or whatever it is we used to create. It's more about understanding that those are just tools, extensions of our creative will.
Oh, I see.
By detaching a little, we can get a clearer perspective on our work. We're not so caught up in the tools themselves.
So it's about seeing the bigger picture, the essence of what we're trying to express, rather than getting lost in the technical details, not
Yeah.
getting so hung up on that perfect brushstroke or the flawless performance.
Exactly. It's about stepping back, becoming the observer of our own process, instead of getting too identified with the tools we're using.
I like that. And how does this detachment help us deal with that resistance we keep talking about?
Well, remember how resistance often tries to make us question our worth, tells us we're not good enough, not talented enough.
Yes, that inner critic can be so brutal.
But when we detach from our instruments, those attacks lose some of their power. We're not so easily shaken.
It's like we're putting on this protective armor, deflecting all those negative arrows.
That's a great way to think about it. It allows us to keep creating even when those voices of doubt are screaming at us to stop.
So we're protecting that core, that essential creative spark within us.
Exactly. And remembering that our true worth isn't tied to the tools we use, but to that inherent drive to create. That's what makes us artists.
This has been such a fascinating and inspiring deep dive. I feel like we've really packed our motivational book with some powerful stuff.
We have overcoming resistance, finding our muse, claiming our territory, detaching from outcomes.
So much great material.
And it's all about empowering artists to tap into their full potential.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about achieving some perfect state of creativity, right?
Right. It's about embracing the journey with all its messy, beautiful imperfections.
It's about enjoying the ride, the ups, the downs, all of it. Because those challenges, those are what make the journey so rewarding.
Absolutely. They push us to grow, to learn, and to create our most authentic work.
So to anyone out there listening who feels that creative spark inside, remember, the power to create, it's within you.
Embrace the challenges.
Find your creative oasis.
And never, ever give up on your dreams.
The world is waiting to see what you create.